I wasn't even supposed to be at the house that early. David had asked me to pick up a package that had been delivered to his mother's place. One of those small errands he always phrased like a favor, though it never really felt like I had a choice. June's house had always made me uneasy, even before we were married. Something about the way it still smelled like plastic couch covers and cinnamon potpourri, like time had stopped in 1994 and refused to budge. The key was under the ceramic frog, like always. I stepped inside and the quiet greeted me like a cold slap. I told myself I'd be in and out. But then, walking past the guest room on my way to the kitchen, I froze. There it was, right in the middle of the room. A baby crib, fully assembled, sheets tucked in, a stuffed bear nestled in the corner, and the mobile hanging above it. It was still spinning, like someone had touched it moments before I arrived. My heart didn't start racing right away. Instead, there was this eerie calm, the kind that slips over you like silk before the scream starts. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. No one had told me about a baby. I wasn't pregnant. I had never even hinted at it. So who was this for? I stepped closer, my hands brushing the rail as if touching it might make it disappear. But it was real, solid, brand new. There were price tags still tucked into the folds of the tiny blanket. I glanced at the dresser nearby, diapers stacked in neat rows, bottles still sealed in plastic, even a brand new baby monitor still in its box. My throat tightened. For a second, I wondered if maybe one of David's cousins was moving in, but no one had said anything. And then, there on the nightstand, was a small photo frame. It held a printout of a sonogram image I had never seen before, with my name printed in the corner. I felt my knees start to give. There had been no positive test, no doctor's call, nothing, just a crib, a room, a photo that should never have existed. I backed out slowly, like the room itself might explode if I moved too fast. Something was wrong, so deeply wrong, and I suddenly felt like a guest inside my own life. Later that evening, when David came home and tossed his keys on the counter like any other day, I couldn't find the words. I studied his face for any sign of guilt, of nervousness, of fear, but there was nothing. Just the man I married, humming to himself, opening the fridge. I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe it was some sort of twisted gift or an innocent mistake. But I knew better. The way the room was prepared, too precise, too intentional. It wasn't a surprise, it was a message. And suddenly, the silence in our marriage, the kind I'd once mistaken for peace, felt like a warning I'd ignored for far too long. I didn't say anything about the crib for 2 whole days. Not to David, not to anyone. I walked around with the image of that nursery carved into the back of my eyes, trying to make sense of something that made none. I told myself there had to be an explanation, maybe a charity drive, maybe a donation project through the church, but nothing fit, especially not the sonogram with my name on it. And still, I said nothing, because saying it out loud would mean forcing David to answer. And I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what he had to say. Instead, I did what I'd been trained to do since marrying into this family: smile, stay calm, blend in. David's family wasn't unkind. They were warm in all the ways that looked good from the outside, always hosting gatherings, bringing food when someone sneezed, organizing prayer circles for distant cousins. They used faith like a safety net, something always ready to catch you, but just as capable of holding you down. Every holiday, every birthday, every Sunday dinner had the same script. June asking when we'd finally bless the family with a baby, David avoiding eye contact, and me pretending not to feel the sharp sting behind her soft words. I remembered one dinner in particular, maybe 2 years ago. June had passed me a dish of roasted potatoes and said something about how, A woman's real purpose blooms after she becomes a mother. Everyone laughed. David chuckled too, not cruelly, just lightly, like someone who thought he was helping by brushing past the moment. I smiled along, even as my stomach turned. That was their way. Wrap judgment in love, lace pressure with tradition. No one ever said anything outright. No one had to. I spent years convincing myself it was okay, that maybe it was me, that maybe I was the one failing to understand what family meant. I even started praying more, hoping that maybe if I got in sync with their rhythm, the answers would come. But there were no answers, just routines and silence. David had always been gentle but distant. He rarely talked about the future unless prompted, and when he did, it always involved when the time is right or when we're ready. I took comfort in that for a while, believing we were on the same page. But now, standing at the edge of something I couldn't name, I began to wonder if we'd ever been reading the same book at all. It was June who carried the torch, always subtly, always sweetly. She'd bring baby shoes to dinner just in case, or email me articles about fertility supplements other women found helpful. I told myself she meant well, that it was cultural, that it was just her way. But deep down, I knew. This was about control. It always had been. I thought back to the early days of my relationship with David, how quickly she'd folded me into the family, how fast the invitations came, the requests to attend Bible study, the matching aprons for Sunday cooking. It felt like inclusion at first, like love. But love doesn't keep score. Love doesn't set up nurseries without consent. That crib, it wasn't about hope, it was about ownership. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a person in this family and started becoming a project, a future, a womb. I tried to shake the thought, but it clung to me. That night, I lay in bed next to David, pretending to be asleep while he scrolled through his phone. The room was dark, quiet, heavy. I could feel the gap between us, not just physical, but emotional, historical. A distance built over years of half conversations and unasked questions. And somewhere in the silence, I realized something I hadn't let myself consider before. Maybe I wasn't the only one lying in this marriage. It started with something small. A feeling, really. The kind of flicker you might ignore if you weren't already carrying doubt in both hands. I was cleaning out my handbag that afternoon. Just one of those routine resets you do when your keys start getting lost under grocery receipts, and I noticed the pill case was gone, not misplaced, gone. I always kept it in the same zippered pocket, neatly tucked away beside my lip balm. It had been there just 3 days before when I took the last dose of the cycle. I remembered clearly because I had debated whether to refill it early or wait until the weekend. But now the case was missing, not empty, just gone. I turned the house upside down. Kitchen drawers, coat pockets, even the bathroom cabinet, in case I'd absent-mindedly tossed it there. Nothing. My mind tried to explain it away. Maybe I'd left it at work. Maybe it slipped under the car seat. But the sense of unease that settled over me was cold, precise, and unrelenting. I asked David casually that night if he'd seen it. He said no, without looking up from his laptop. His voice was flat, uninterested, like I'd asked about the mail, but something about how quickly he dismissed it. It stayed with me. For the next 2 days, I walked through the house like a stranger, looking at everything with fresh eyes. The drawers he used, the bags he took to work, even the garage shelves where he kept his old high school trophies. I wasn't looking for the pills, not really. I was looking for confirmation of a suspicion I didn't want to name. And then I found it. Not the pill case, but something else. A small receipt, crumpled, stuffed into the back pocket of his jeans in the laundry basket. It was from a pharmacy across town, a place neither of us usually went to. The charge was for a prenatal vitamin pack and something labeled ovulation test strips. My name was nowhere on it. I sat on the floor for a long time, holding that tiny piece of thermal paper like it was a live wire. My chest felt hollow, not angry, not panicked, just emptied. I was staring at evidence of something I didn't understand, but my body already knew the shape of it. That night, I didn't ask questions. I didn't confront him. I watched him pour himself a glass of water and scroll through headlines. He looked normal, boring, predictable, and yet, somewhere behind that calm exterior, a choice had been made, a choice I hadn't been part of. I started to rewind everything in my head. The past year, the strange timing of June's baby comments, David's increasing interest in Sunday school discussions about fruitfulness and obedience, the crib, the sonogram, the missing pills. It was all pointing in one direction. Someone had decided it was time for me to become pregnant, and they weren't going to wait for me to agree. The next morning, I called the pharmacy. I used a fake name, said I was checking on a relative's pickup. They were polite but firm. No information without patient confirmation. I hung up before giving mine. But that was enough. I didn't need their records. I had my own. I went to the guest room again, stood at the edge of the crib, and stared down at the soft bedding. It was the same pale green we'd once agreed we'd use someday. I wondered how long they'd been planning this, how many little pieces they'd moved quietly into place while I was busy blaming myself for not being enough. Suddenly, the years of silence between me and David no longer felt neutral. They felt tactical, because silence can be a kind of consent. And I had been silent for far too long. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow, hypnotic circles. David turned over once, maybe twice, muttering something in his sleep. I didn't respond. I just stared upward, numb, trying to pull together a timeline from the pieces that didn't want to fit. By morning, I wasn't angry. I was aware. And awareness, when it finally arrives, doesn't bring fury or fire. It brings clarity, cold and quiet, like fresh glass breaking in your hand before you even realize you're bleeding. I started with the closet. There, pushed behind an old winter coat, was a sealed envelope. Not hidden exactly, but tucked away enough to be intentional. I unfolded it with shaking fingers and found a pamphlet from a Christian fertility retreat. The dates were marked in red pen. 2 months ago, David had never mentioned going anywhere. But on that weekend, I remembered he told me he had a work seminar in Dallas. I even packed his bag. There was also a business card inside, a name I didn't recognize, but I searched it anyway. A faith-based reproductive counselor. I stared at the title for a long time. Then I remembered the night we ran out of milk and David offered to pick some up. I had asked him to grab a few things and handed him the grocery list. He was gone for almost 2 hours. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now even the milk seemed suspicious. Everything started folding into place. The missing birth control, the pharmacy receipt, the quiet tension in June's voice every time she said she was praying for a miracle. The way David had become more affectionate recently, calculated even, how he touched my back in the kitchen, brushed hair from my cheek, lingered longer when he kissed my forehead. It hadn't felt genuine. It had felt like rehearsal. I had believed I was part of a marriage grounded in patience and understanding. But it wasn't patience, it was strategy. They weren't waiting for a miracle. They were trying to manufacture one without me knowing. I thought about my body, how carefully I had treated it, the routines I followed, the guilt I carried, and now to realize someone else might be making decisions about it without my consent, it made my skin feel foreign, like I was living in a house I didn't remember building. And then came the final thread. In the bottom drawer of David's nightstand, beneath an old passport and a tangle of charging cables, was a folded page from our insurance provider, a claim summary for a procedure done last year, one I hadn't seen before. It was for a vasectomy reversal. My breath caught. For a moment, everything inside me went still. I didn't even know he'd had the original procedure. He never told me. But now, tucked in this drawer, was proof that he had chosen, on his own, in secret, to undo it. Not for me, not with me, for them, for her, for a future that had been written without my pen. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the man I married. He was still asleep, mouth slightly open, snoring softly. So normal, so familiar. And yet I felt nothing but distance, miles of betrayal between us, laid brick by brick in the shape of kindness and faith. I had never felt so profoundly alone. The truth wasn't a moment. It wasn't a scream or a fight. It was a slow, quiet unraveling of trust, like thread slipping from a spool until there was nothing left to sew it back together. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you know, you can't unknow. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My hand trembled as I lifted it to my lips, not from fear, but from resolve. I wasn't going to wait for them to come clean. I wasn't going to play the role they'd written for me in a script I never saw. They wanted a miracle. They were about to lose the one they already had. I didn't pack much, just the essentials, a small suitcase, my journal, and the sweater I always wore when I needed to feel like myself again. I didn't bother with boxes or plans. This wasn't a move. This was a release. David was still at work when I left. June, too, thankfully. I waited until the house was quiet. I didn't want explanations. I didn't want one more smile that felt like a mask. I just wanted to leave before they tried to rewrite the ending again. But before I walked out the door, I returned to the room that started it all. The nursery. It looked the same, untouched, as if time had stopped the moment I stepped away. The sheets were still tucked tight. The mobile above the crib still hung gently, unmoving now, as if waiting for the breath of a child that would never arrive. I sat in the rocking chair, the one with the soft blue cushion, clearly chosen with care, and let myself feel everything. Grief, for the years I spent thinking I was broken. Anger, for the manipulation. Sadness, for the version of my marriage that only existed in my imagination. But also relief. Relief that I could finally step out of the role I was never meant to play. That I could breathe without waiting for permission. That I could write a new chapter, in my own words, for once. I took out the letter. It wasn't long, just a few sentences written in ink that didn't smudge this time. I placed it in the crib beneath the stuffed bear, where I knew June would find it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. It read, "A child is not a prize to be won or a duty to be fulfilled. A woman is not a vessel for someone else's dream. You had a miracle in your family, but you never saw her, now she's gone." I didn't cry as I closed the door behind me. I didn't feel rage or triumph. I just felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I wasn't managing anyone's expectations. I was walking away from a stage I never asked to be on. And in that silence, in that stillness between goodbye and what comes next, I found myself again, not as a wife, not as a daughter-in-law, but as me, whole, undivided, unapologetic,